Freezing to death takes 3 hours. Fingers go numb, brain stops working. You lie down in the snow and never get up. Winter 1941. German soldiers died by the thousands from cold alone. Not bullets, just weather. Yet Soviet soldiers survived in the exact same temperatures. Same blizzards. Same minus 40 degrees hell. What did the Soviets know? 4 winters at minus 40 degrees. Cold enough to freeze diesel solid. Germans showed up expecting to be home by Christmas in wool uniforms designed for France, not Russia. Big mistake. Soviet soldiers had something Germans didn't. Not better guns, better underwear. Sounds stupid, right? But extreme cold isn't fought on your skin. It's fought in the layers between. Soviet infantry wore quilted cotton Telegrika jackets, cheap, looked like pajamas. German officers laughed. Those officers were dead by February. Why? And cotton traps air. Trapped air is the best insulator on Earth. Multiple thin layers with air pockets, each pocket a thermal barrier. Germans had thick wool coats, but wool compresses under gear weight. No air gaps means no insulation. Physics doesn't care about your budget. And here's the genius part. When a Soviet soldier's jacket got wet, he'd sleep on it. His body heat would dry it overnight. Germans? Their wool stayed wet for days. Wet wool is worse than no wool. It actually pulls heat away from your body faster than bare skin, but clothing only gets you halfway there. The real difference was what the Soviets ate, and when they ate it. German soldiers got the same rations in winter that they got in summer. Canned meat, hard bread, chocolate, stuff designed for nutrition, not survival. The Wehrmacht logistics manual had 0 adjustments for cold weather caloric needs. None. Soviet soldiers got an extra 500 calories per day during winter campaigns. But here's what matters more than the amount. The type: pork fat, lard, raw animal fat cut into chunks and issued like candy bars. German soldiers thought it was disgusting. Soviet soldiers knew it was fuel. Fat produces more than twice the metabolic heat of carbohydrates. When you digest fat, your body works harder. That extra work generates warmth from the inside. It's called diet-induced thermogenesis. Fancy name for turning your stomach into a furnace. Red Army soldiers would eat a chunk of lard an hour before night watch. The fat would metabolize slowly over the next 4 to 6 hours, right when temperatures dropped lowest, right when hypothermia kills. Strategic eating. The Germans never figured this out. They kept eating the same foods and wondering why they couldn't stop shivering. Then there's the drink issue, and this is where things get dark. German commanders issued schnapps to troops as a warming ration. Soldiers loved it, felt warm for about 20 minutes. Then their core temperature would drop even faster. Alcohol dilates blood vessels, brings blood to your skin surface, makes you radiate heat like a broken radiator. Hundreds of German soldiers literally drank themselves to death, thinking liquor would save them. Soviet soldiers got hot tea. Just tea. Boiled water with cheap leaves, nothing special. Except it was hot liquid entering your core at 140 degrees. That's direct internal heating. And here's the trick. They drank it constantly. Every 2 hours during cold operations. It kept their core temperature stable, kept their blood flowing, kept them alive. But warmth from food and drink only works if you're not bleeding heat faster than you can make it. And that's where the Valenki changed everything. Valenki are felt boots. They look like something a cartoon character would wear. Thick, clunky, made from pressed wool felt. No laces, no structure, just cylindrical tubes of felt that you shove your feet into. German soldiers wore leather boots. Proper military boots with laces and polish and everything you'd expect from a professional army. Leather boots killed thousands of Germans. Here's why. Leather's a great insulator when it's dry, but it absorbs moisture, sweat, snow, doesn't matter. Once leather gets wet in sub-zero temperatures, it freezes solid. Your boot becomes a frozen shell around your foot. Blood flow stops. Frostbite sets in within hours. Field hospitals were amputating toes and feet by the hundreds every single day. Valenki don't absorb moisture the same way. The felt wicks sweat away from skin, and even when they get damp, they maintain their insulating properties. Soviet soldiers could march through snow for hours. Their feet stayed warm, not comfortable, not dry, but warm enough to avoid frostbite. The Germans tried to compensate. They'd wrap their feet in newspaper, stuff straw in their boots. Some cut felt from captured Soviet supplies. Too little, too late. By the winter of 1942, more German soldiers were out of action from frostbite than from combat wounds. Let that sink in. The cold was a better weapon than the Red Army. but keeping your body warm is only half the battle. Where you sleep matters just as much. And Soviet soldiers treated shelter like it was advanced tactical training. German troops dug standard foxholes, military doctrine straight from the manual, rectangular holes in the ground with a soldier sitting at the bottom. Perfect for Western Europe. Absolute death traps in Russia. Cold air's heavy. It sinks. A foxhole becomes a pool of frozen air. You're sitting in the coldest spot possible. Germans would fall asleep on watch and never wake up, froze to death sitting upright. Soviet soldiers dug zemlyankas, not foxholes, underground bunkers. They'd dig down about 4 feet, then horizontally into the side of a hill or embankment, creating a cave. Then they'd roof it with logs and pile dirt on top, insulated from above and below. Here's the science. That the Earth's temperature just a few feet down stays around 45 degrees, even when the surface is minus 40 degrees. Doesn't matter how cold the air gets, the ground maintains its temperature. So, a zemlyanka isn't trying to stay warm against minus 40 degrees air. It's borrowing the Earth's natural temperature. Huge difference. And they didn't stop there. Inside the zemlyanka, they'd build a small stove from scrap metal, vent it through a pipe going up through the dirt roof, burn anything. Wood scraps, furniture from destroyed villages, even books if they had to. One small fire in an insulated underground shelter could keep 6 soldiers alive through the night. The Germans? They stood around oil drum fires in open air, felt warm for a few minutes, lost all that heat the second they stepped away. Some tried sleeping in abandoned buildings. Hey, but buildings without heat are just wind blocks. The walls might stop wind, but they don't generate warmth. Soviet soldiers learned this in their own country. The Germans learned it too late. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Because all this gear and all this knowledge doesn't mean anything if you can't keep your weapon firing. Metal behaves weirdly in extreme cold. Gun oil thickens into paste. Mechanisms freeze. The Germans used standard lubricants designed for temperate climates. Their rifles stopped working. Bolt-action Kar 98K rifles would jam because the oil turned to glue. Machine guns seized up mid-battle. Tanks wouldn't start because the grease in the gears had frozen solid. Soviet weapons were designed differently. Not better engineering, simpler engineering. The PPSH-41 submachine gun had loose tolerances, and parts fit together with gaps you could see. It looked crude. That's exactly why it worked. Dirt couldn't jam it, ice couldn't seize it, and Soviet soldiers were trained to use almost no gun oil in winter. They'd strip their weapons nearly dry, just the bare minimum lubrication. Tanks were even more brutal. German panzers needed to be warmed up for hours before starting in cold weather. Crews would light fires under the engine block, risking explosions, advertising their position with smoke. Soviet T-34 tanks had diesel engines that were easier to start in cold. But here's the real trick. Soviet tank crews would drain their oil at night, sleep with the oil cans inside their coats. Body heat kept the oil liquid. In the morning, they'd pour warm oil back into the engine and start it immediately. Sleeping with oil cans? What? That's not in any military manual. That's desperation turned into doctrine. But even with all these advantages, there's one thing that mattered more than gear, food, shelter, or weapons. And it's the thing nobody wants to talk about. The Soviets were fighting for their homes. German soldiers were 1,500 miles from Berlin, fighting a war of conquest in a place they didn't understand. When temperatures dropped and conditions got unbearable, morale collapsed. Thousands deserted. Thousands more just gave up, sat down and waited to freeze or be captured. Soviet soldiers were defending their own soil, fighting a war of survival against an enemy that had explicit plans to exterminate them. The cold was horrible, but going home meant surrendering their families to genocide. That's not morale. That's something harder than morale. So Soviet commanders understood this. They didn't need to give inspiring speeches. Reality did that for them. German commanders tried to motivate troops with talk of glory and destiny. Hard to care about destiny when your toes are turning black. And here's the part that really separated the two sides. Community survival tactics. Soviet soldiers paired up. Buddy system. One sleeps while the other keeps watch. Not just for enemies, for frostbite, for hypothermia. If your partner stops shivering, that's not a good sign. That means their body is shutting down. Shivering is your body fighting back. When it stops fighting, you're dying. Soviet soldiers would physically shake their partners awake, force them to move, keep blood flowing. Germans had the system too, on paper. But frozen soldiers are selfish soldiers. Everyone hoards warmth. Shares nothing, looks out for themselves. The Soviets maintained unit cohesion even in the worst conditions. They'd rotate positions near fires, share Valenki if someone's boots failed. Pool food. It wasn't kindness, it was survival math. A frozen soldier can't fight, can't stand watch, becomes dead weight. Keeping your unit alive keeps you alive. Some Soviet units developed cold check protocols. Every hour, soldiers would report their condition. Numb fingers, start moving, can't feel toes, take immediate action. Early interventions saved thousands of lives. But here's what made these protocols actually work. They weren't suggestions, they were orders. A squad leader would go down the line. Each soldier had to physically demonstrate they could still make a fist, still wiggle their toes inside their Valenki. If you couldn't, you got pulled from your position immediately. No arguments, no tough guy routines, and there was a reason for the strictness. Frostbite has stages. Stage 1, you lose feeling. Uncomfortable, but reversible. Stage 2, your tissue starts crystallizing. Still salvageable if you act fast. Stage 3, your cells are dying. Amputation territory. Stage 4, gangrene sets in. You're dead, you just don't know it yet. The Soviets understood that the gap between Stage 1 and Stage 3 could be as little as 90 minutes in extreme cold. So the hourly checks weren't paranoia, they were mathematics. Catch it at Stage 1, soldier keeps fighting. Catch it at Stage 3, you've lost a man. Soviet officers carried a specific checklist. White patches on skin, frostbite starting. Waxy appearance, already Stage 2. Black discoloration, too late. They were trained to recognize these signs faster than most doctors. Had to be. There were no doctors out there, just snow and Nazis. The rewarming protocols were just as specific. No fires, no hot water. Sounds backward, right? But rapid rewarming of frozen tissue causes the cells to explode, literally burst from thermal shock. Soviet soldiers would take frostbitten men and press the affected areas against warm skin, armpits, stomach, inner thighs, slow controlled warming. German soldiers would stick frozen hands directly into fires, ruin the tissue permanently. The Germans had no such system. By the time someone realized they had frostbite, it was too late. German military culture emphasized toughness. Complaining about cold was seen as weakness. So soldiers would hide their symptoms until they physically couldn't walk anymore, until their fingers were black and their feet were rotting inside their boots. Field reports from December 1941 described German aid stations overflowing with frostbite cases. Soldiers with frozen feet so swollen, they had to cut the boots off. The leather had frozen to the skin. When they removed the boots, chunks of flesh came with them. Surgeons were doing amputations in unheated barns with handsaws. No anesthesia left, just vodka and screaming. One German doctor wrote in his diary that he'd amputated more limbs in 3 weeks than in his entire previous career. He stopped counting after 200, said the pile of frozen toes and fingers outside the medical tent looked like a butcher's waste heap. That's not war. That's systematic failure of basic survival knowledge. Now let's talk numbers, because the scale of this is almost impossible to believe. During the winter of 1941 to 1942, German Army Group Center lost more than 100,000 soldiers to frostbite. Not killed, just removed from combat effectiveness because parts of their body froze and died. Another 14,000 died directly from cold exposure. Those are conservative estimates from official Wehrmacht records. Some historians put the real number twice as high. To put that in perspective, that's more casualties than the entire D-Day invasion. From weather, not from Soviet bullets or artillery or tactics. From wearing the wrong socks. And here's what really drives it home. In a single 2-week period in January 1942, the 6th Panzer Division reported 800 frostbite casualties. That same division had only 200 combat casualties in the same period. The cold was killing 4 times as many Germans as the Red Army was. German hospitals in occupied Poland were so overwhelmed, they started refusing frostbite cases, told field units to handle it themselves. Handle it themselves meant stacking frozen soldiers in barns and hoping they'd either recover or die quickly. Most died. Not from the frostbite itself, from infections that set in because there were no antibiotics, no clean bandages, nothing.